Hello again, I'm Mike, and this is Keepers of the Word. Today's topic is the call to Babylon, with special guest Tau Nahash, also known as Bobby. The introduction to this topic is the call to Babylon, the 77 days. In Thelemic and occult tradition, the number 77 is often associated with the god Horus and his 77 forms or aspects. It is also thought to symbolize the completion or attainment of spiritual development. Additionally, the number 77 is sometimes associated with the tarot deck, the Chariot, which is said to represent victory and triumph through willpower and determination. So, Bobby, give me
Yes.
some history on Babylon.
Okay. Well, Ecclesia Babylon is a Gnostic sacramental community. We were founded on Walpurgisnacht in 2018. Currently, we exist in several countries. We have membership in Canada, America, Mexico, Brazil, Britain, Japan, currently, on and on. We are a community devoted to the sacramental adoration of the goddess Babylon, in short. A longer explanation is that we're a sacramental community that formed initially within the independent sacramental movement. The majority of us were French Gnostics. I myself being a consecrated bishop through T.L. and Greenfield and a few others in the tradition. And we started seeing in our own practice an influx of the occult and the esoteric. And it was something that we just didn't want to piecemeal anymore. The community came together as a way to explore and express it all simultaneously. And our focus, as it's always been, has been on the Holy Mother in the communities that I've worked in. And through personal revelation, through personal work and work as a community, through the methods of congregational illuminism, we came to the recognition of Babylon being our supreme form of Godhead. And we decided to focus our work on exploring what that means in a modern context. So the community started to, initially, it was pretty Gnostic, sacramental, very Catholic looking in people's eyes. In time, it started to develop and take on a different life due to the influence and the presence of new members and thinkers and seekers that brought in different dynamics into the community. One of those happened in 2019. Tau Nahash in Brazil crafted what became the call to Babylon and we introduced it to the American community, and we began the first devotional call season, which led up to the winter solstice. So it was a 77-day working leading up, beginning October 6th, leading up to the winter solstice. And during that time, every day for 77 days, we recited this rite, the call to Babylon, which was essentially a abbreviated sacramental ritual involving mantra work, involving liturgy, involving sacramental theurgy and sacrifice through the form of wine or grape juice or whatever medium or species you wanted to use. So we began to take on that work as a group. First, it started to happen in small numbers, but as of this year, we had the largest working, several hundred people all over the world doing the call to Babylon at once. And what we've found as this rite has started to increase in the number of people performing it, we have noticed that the potency of the fruits of the devotion, in a sense, has increased. So the more that we have engaged in it, and the more that our community has inspired others to engage in the call, because our development of the call was not specifically for our group alone. It was meant for anyone that wanted to peer into the egregore of Babylon. So, and to help graft yourself into that energy through, a daily 77-day theurgic working. So we've started to see results that we didn't anticipate, and it's led to us feeling compelled to continue on this path because we feel like with every performance of this call, we find more reasons to continue to practice it. We teach that Babalon reveals herself within synchronicity. And that's the first thing that people start to notice when they get into this working is how the synchronicities in your life will start to crystallize. And it when people start going into the working, they almost kind of think it's a cliche thing we're saying when we say the synchronicities are going to become a little overwhelming at first. And a couple of weeks into it, they'll say to me, "Wow, you're not kidding. I wasn't ready for that." But we've noticed the more we've worked the ritual, the more potent those synchronicities with people have gotten, including myself from the time that I first did the initial call in 2019, and I just finished my sixth time of doing it. The synchronicities and the fruits of the devotion of this practice have manifested tremendously.
Now, when we talk about the Scarlet Woman, she's known by many different names, right? Mother of
Right.
Abominations, the Scarlet Woman. Why do you think she has so many names? Or what is your explanation on that?
Because she's everything. She's every name, and she's no name. I feel personally that when I read The Thunder Perfect Mind, I'm reading about Babalon. No one called her Babylon back then. No one had to. She just simply existed as is. So Babylon is a name that we've come to recognize her as recently,
Hmm.
but who she is cosmic, prehistorical, beyond that. And our seeking her is a natural desire to return to the mother. And she represents every facet of the mother's existence, of the sacred whore, of the maiden, of the crone. Every aspect of the Holy Mother exists within Babylon, even to the point to where the masculine also exists within Babylon.
Interesting.
So
How does that work out?
totality of Godhead,
Okay.
an understanding of deity in a monist sense, how it's not just me and you, it's not just our ideas or polarities, it's also the dishes that you're having to wash and the lawn you have to mow and the trash you have to take out, all the same stuff. We recognize it as all being part and parcel of this one source point, that being the Holy Mother, who we call Babylon. So it's kind of like when someone says, how can you get the Divine Mother and the Divine Father? And I said, well, I guess the same way that you get a mother and a son. And I know then it goes even farther. You have to have the divine concepts of masculine and feminine, the eternal principles, the pillars. But it goes beyond that. And
You know,
after
this
you get to that point, you're dealing in the oneness and the nothingness at the same time.
I've read that she's also associated with the goddess Isis from Egypt and also the Sumerian goddess Inanna. So if from what you're saying and what I'm getting is she is as old as creation itself because she's
Absolutely.
technically is creation.
Absolutely.
You know, when you look at things from a Christian standpoint, you think of male being creation. Realistically, in the older religions, it was, well, in biology too, females are the creators.
As
Male,
above, so below.
exactly. The male is the seed. Females are the creation of
Right.
everything.
So
Uh,
it's like it's basically um, you would see the divine feminine as being the divine principle of generation. The divine masculine would be the divine principle of activation.
hmm,
When you have generation and activation put together, then you have the logos, the thought, the concept, the structure. So that's how we understand the necessity for both. But beyond that, you still have to go beyond that. People tend to kind of stop as if any of this has an endpoint. Like once you get here, then that's the cap. once you get to Keter, once you get to this, once you get to the Ein Sof, that's the cap. And it's not the cap. It's just kind of where we're at right now with understanding it all.
It's a target. And if once
Yeah.
you hit that target, there's a possibility to go higher than that target. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It's
Now,
we refer to it as the continuing story.
okay. How would you say the Scarlet Woman is associated with the great work? Is she the actual great work?
So we've had discussions in Ecclesia Babylon on the nature of the Scarlet Woman and the presence of her in the manner of creating esoteric understanding. And that presence, that scarlet woman that people refer to, we tend to see more as a scarlet muse, an inspiration, a mechanism of the Holy Mother that comes into you like the flame of the Holy Spirit. And some people will anthropomorphize that into it has to be this person. I have to have this person with me in order to get this thing. We don't teach that. We teach that energy, that presence is part of what you receive in your working of the call. It's the thing that it's the mechanism of inspiration that causes people to be able to go further in their work. It's not something that I guess it's not something that you utilize like a tool. You receive the Scarlet Woman like you would receive the words of a genius. You wouldn't look at the Scarlet Woman as if she's a prop to your story as protagonist. So in that regard, yeah.
This spiritual union that takes 77 days. Could you give me a kind of synopsis of what that entails?
You mean as far as the call itself, the
The call
breakdown of the
itself.
ritual?
Yeah.
So okay, well I'll run you through it.
Okay.
Let me get to it.
We got time.
The beginning of the call is the birth of Babylon, written by Jack Parsons. So
Oh.
Jack Parsons for us has a special place in our cosmology, in a sense. We tend to be of agreement that he is most likely the author of Book 4, the fourth chapter, and that Liber 49, that he was the author of the fourth chapter of the Book of the Law, and that his writing of Liber 49, if you read it, happened in two parts and is very much a road to Damascus story. He was in ignorance and blinded in the first part. He has a crack of revelation in the second part, and he's set upon his mission. So when people talk about Jack Parsons and they say, well, Hubbard got the best of him, when you understand the story, that was when he was in his blindness. And through his ardor, in October of 1948, he received the Book of Antichrist, which said about his mission. That was his anointing at that point. So we incorporate Jack Parsons into our liturgy, into our rituals, and it opens in the call to Babylon with the birth of Babylon. Once you read the entirety of the birth of Babylon, it leads you into the mantra, and that is the I'll read it in English. I am the harlot that shaketh death, the shaking giveth the peace of satiate lust. Immortality jetteth from my skull, and music from my vulva. Immortality jetteth from my vulva also, for my whoredom is a sweet scent like a seven-stringed instrument, played unto God the invisible, the all-ruler, that goeth along giving the shrill scream of orgasm. And you say this on our mala 49 times. We have a 49 bead mala in memory of Liber 49. The 49 beads were chosen specifically due to the recognition of that. Our use of 77 days, along with the other correspondences to the number 77, also is for us the 77 verses in the Book of Babylon, or in Liber 49, I'm sorry. So this is something that we use to remind ourselves through smaller teaching, the larger teaching. So as we're going through the call, why do we do it once, a day for 77 days? So we understand the number 77 through our teachings. Why do we have 49 beads in our mala? Well, we talk about the reasons for that, and it leads us into this coherent working. Then every 10 days, as you go through this ritual, you are met with a gate. And what a gate is essentially a module of teaching that we in the community use, which includes ritual and devotion and meditations. And we continue on. So I got off track.
No, it's cool.
After
Yeah,
the
I like all
after,
that.
after the mantra, you have the consecration of the wine or the juice, or it's really whatever species you want to use. There's people in recovery, and I always tell folks that are in recovery, don't drink wine just because someone else is drinking wine. Stick to your grape juice if you're gonna if you're if you don't drink alcohol, don't make yourself just for this ritual. So we go into the consecration, we drink the wine, mass is ended. At that point, we go about our day. The rite itself takes about 30 minutes, and I tend to do it first thing in the morning, so it's just taking the place of a daily devotional. Even outside of the call season, I still say the call to Babalon almost daily, I would say at this point.
Oh, okay.
If not every day, every other day. It's yeah. So yeah, that's the working itself. And as you go through it, you start to experience all the ardor of pilgrimage. You start to realize that, well, you've been doing this a long time and you're tired, and you start to get restless, and you're like, maybe I want to do some other stuff. I want to, and the whole point is to stick with it, even through at times the self-imposed monotony, or what you consider, you have to just go through the whole 77 days. And once you get to that point, that's when people start to really understand the fullness of the teaching, because they get to that end point and they say, I understood
But
what
it's also
we're all
giving you,
trying to do.
in order for you to achieve something, you must sacrifice. That's with anything. That's even with
Yeah.
work. It's not really sacrifice. It's like you said, devotion and being able to show up every day and do the work. And
The
that is
call to yeah.
it's kind of giving you a habit that you're building. And if you build consistent habits, consistent habits, good habits, good habits equal success. And that's at all levels, right? So I see
Some
what you guys are doing, and that sounds like you're building up the spirit, you're building up the person to be at one with the deity.
When someone finishes the call to Babylon, what I say to them is, I say, look at what you've accomplished. Look at what you've done. A 77-day theurgic working is not nothing.
Right.
And these people coming into it didn't think they would be able to do it for 4 days. Or along the way, they started to have self-doubt. I know I did at one point. But it's part of a greater understanding of how one should take care of themselves also in the practice of the occult. We teach it's not discipline is important, even to the point to where we have to keep our place clean. Like I keep my house clean. I keep my bathrooms clean. I keep my altar room clean. I keep everything clean. I keep everything on time, because if you don't, things start to slip. Depression starts to creep in. You
That right
start
there.
to, yeah, you start to just doubt yourself just because of your own environment. But if you're living in a clean house, if you're waking up and you're going through a rite and you finish that, you've got your clean home, you've accomplished so much already, and the day is not even started. So right there, you've accomplished what more than most, and it has nothing to do with your looks. It has nothing to do with your abilities. It has nothing to do with your personality. It has to do with only you. And me doing this makes no difference whenever you're going through it, because your experience is going to be subjective to you. You're
Correct.
not going to have the same experience I will. And if you do, that means that we've done something wrong. We've led you in a direction where you think that hegemony is what we're looking for, and we're not. We're looking for explorers, to tell us what they find on the other side, because this working is still new and fresh to everyone. Just a few years old.
Hmm.
So it's something that it's become, it was an unexpected arrival in our community, the call was. And when we first started to engage in it, I went through probably every single experience that most of the folks that have gone through it talk about when it comes to having to take a hard look at yourself. Self reflection becomes a big subject during the call because everyone starts to engage in it. Self reflection for the purpose of moving forward is the theme. So, what we hope that people do is they find ways to be able to come to terms with issues they're working with internally as they're going through this, because again, it's a devotion to the Holy Mother. So I would think personally that the Holy Mother would help ease that, because she has done that for us. The concerns and to change the trajectory of your life by reinforcing your ability to apply change and apply discipline and apply focus.
I,
A
I
lot
like
of
what I'm
groups
hearing.
a lot of groups do that though. So
Yeah.
it's not we're not special in that regard, because I think that a lot of people have great ways to accomplish that. It's just that this is a way that we've found, and it's produced a particular set of results that have been incredible to us and unbelievable at times.
Would you be able to say there comes spiritual benefits to this? Are there any changes within the psyche or any changes within the person that you have seen in these last couple years where people have experienced things that were out of the norm?
So I have received reports that I know that one member, when she went through, she said that she came into the knowledge of her HGA at the end of the 77 days. Um, I myself had an intense experience at one of the calls, but it was personal, so I don't usually talk about exactly what happened, but it was something that was jarring to me. The working at one point produced dreams unlike I had ever had before. Little things like that for me peppered in throughout the entire working, every working. So there's always been something, but I can't say that, well, if you do the call to Babylon, you're going to astral travel. No, I can't say that, because you might not. I mean, I've had people do the call to Babylon that it was totally about making them the protagonist of the story of Babylon. So they wanted to do the call so they could somehow get to this lofty, elevated position that they had already set themselves at, instead of kind of having to do the humble work of improving those places in your life that are rough. And
Hmm.
what happens is people don't get out of it anything. I've had that happen where they've said, this isn't for me. They quit 20 days in, and that's the way it goes, because that's any community you go to. You're going to have people that don't resonate with the practice or the work at all. You're going to have people that the work changes them and the work helps motivate them. And I've seen both.
Would you say that this path isn't for everyone, and it might be dangerous for those who kind of suffer from some mental illness? And I think that could
I
be in
think it,
regard for anything, but
yeah, I mean, we kind of get into, we have to be careful, I guess, because when we start saying to people, oh, don't do this if you've got mental illness, well, anyone's going to do
right.
anything. And so what I say to people is, um, if your life is in a state of fracture or brokenness, engaging in any long, intense working is not recommended. You should always kind of help get your primary life together. If you're facing eviction, the call to Babylon is not going to help you not get evicted. If you're, you know, like we don't heal diseases through this working. Nothing like that's going to happen. And I think sometimes in the history of magic and the occult, we've had very fantastic claims made that we come to find out had nothing to do with reality and everything to do with the magicians kind of wanting to be that guy. And if we're being on, if we're being honest about it, we have to understand that, and it's like, no, we're living in Malkuth. We're living in the real world of blood and guts and McDonald's Happy Meals and everything else, and we still have to work within that paradigm. So we have to kind of keep our rational head about us, but then we also have to do the work of recognizing the signs when they arrive, which seems a little paradoxical, but it's not, because I do it all the time. Because we constantly have to wonder, we constantly have to check, we constantly have to search. There's a manner of prayer in any spiritual community and faith, even though Gnostics don't like that word very much. Any of this requires a modicum of faith in order to leap from it. I know Thelemites would probably, you know, they'd probably tell me I was dead wrong with that, but I don't know.
It's your path,
That's
though,
my
man.
that's
Yeah,
my
it's your,
opinion, man.
and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
I feel, with all these different systems, from the OTA to OTO, Golden Dawn, Call to Babylon, everybody has their own path and their own way of reaching their spiritual enlightenment.
yeah,
And if it works for you, cool, man. More hats off
yeah,
to you. But if you're, like you said, if you're doing it because you want to heal, yourself from cancer, or if you're doing it because you want to get this promotion, you're doing it for selfish reasons. Well, maybe cancer isn't a selfish reason, but it's unrealistic. Instead of like actually going to a doctor and doing the work that needs to be done, you're over here doing going down a path that it's not proven. You're asking for help from. So I think that's where get confused, where they feel if they join these specific orders, they're going to have certain powers, and
right,
that's not necessary. That's not real. That's not what real magic is. For me, and this is my personal opinion, it has nothing to do with any path. I feel magic is being able to change the things that you want to change in your life through ritual. And for me, ritual is doing something every day to get you further and further and further into your goal. And
yeah,
ritual, even in Freemasonry, when we're doing ritual in lodge, you're doing it for a goal. You're doing it for
yeah,
transformation and alchemy. You're doing
absolutely.
it to become a better person. So in this sense, in this form, the call to Babylon is technically that, with a little more discipline. 77 days, that's a long time. That's not something to be taken lightly. And I feel, you probably have, and I've had my fair share of guys hitting me up on my page like, hey, I want to sell my soul, or hey, you get a
Yeah,
lot
I
of the
got those.
desperate people who don't
Yeah,
know what the hell this is, but they want to assume. And you know what? I'll be honest though, there are some depictions of the Scarlet Woman that are very dark, and I can understand
yeah,
why somebody would see that. But sometimes nature is dark, you
that's
know,
right.
and that's reality. And your mom probably spanked you once or twice in her lifetime. That's reality, So that's just my take on that part. Would you
I
would you
was at a
say? Go ahead, finish.
so I was at a temple years ago, and I was standing in front of a Murti of Kali Ma. There was a gentleman there, and I had made this comment about how she looks fearsome. And he said, she's only scary to those that don't see her properly. He said, she doesn't scare me, she scares people that don't understand her. And that's when we talk about the darkness of that's inherent in all shadow work. These are unavoidable things in our life: death, mortality, our own shortcomings as people. These are things that we have to battle. And so the Dark Mother is ever present in that respect. And I don't hesitate to call upon the Holy Mother in the manner I always have growing up, in order to help fortify myself from my own shortcomings, pitfalls, aspects of myself that I would like to maybe fine tune, because we all have it. You know, we're
Right.
all, I think the biggest barrier to esoteric progress are leaders that don't admit that they themselves don't understand everything fully, and that they themselves are still seekers. You know, and it was different. Like, I don't want to sound like one of those old guys, but it was different in the 90s, because in the 90s there weren't a lot of us, right? So when we all got together, I remember neo-pagan gatherings, magic gatherings, etc. There was everyone from every tradition intermingling, doing ritual work together. I mean, on and on and on. And now everybody is camped up.
Yeah.
Everyone not only in not only are they camped up in the various Wicca, Thelema, etc., but they're camped up within their own denominations. And so now we've got just this kind of state of quasi cannibalism in the esoteric world that I'm hoping kind of like goes out of trend pretty soon, because it's getting kind of tired, you know.
Yeah, I get you. And, that's kind of why I feel at some point these different paths are going to intersect and kind of absorb each other, because technically they are the same thing. They just have
Yeah,
specific little nuances that are done differently.
that's it.
Um, but for me, I just feel it's all technically going to intermingle. And like you said, in the '90s, there were just covens, and they were just different. And there were, of course, the Golden Dawn and the OTO, and they've been around since forever, but they weren't as
E-
prevalent as they were now. You
Well,
know?
even those folks were happy to get into an occult bookstore. Like, even
Yeah.
those folks, when they see another Wiccan, would be like, "Oh,
Hey,
well,
buddy.
close enough." Yeah, you
Yeah.
know, it's like things were different before the craft. No one knows, but
That changed things for real. It did,
people don't
because
know.
once,
It,
and that was what, late '90s. The craft was the late
yeah,
'90s, and that changed things for everyone after that, because it really brought into to the light of the actual covens and what is done, the kind of work that's done. And of course, just it's funny, as last week I just had a conversation with my friend Mike, and we were talking about media and witchcraft, media and magic, and how it's being portrayed versus what we saw back then. Back in the '90s,
yeah,
it wasn't as open. Now you got
no,
Wednesday, you have the Rings of
yeah.
Power, you have the magicians. I mean, it's just open season for magic. And I feel, this whole witch talk trend, it's probably going to start to come down at some point, because again, these paths take work. And a lot of the people who just follow trends don't want to do the work. And there's a lot of fake witches out there, man, and the fake,
So I want
fake brujos. You know what I mean?
the kind of goes slightly off topic, but something I do want to say, because we're talking about this. The occult world just lost a gentleman today, Jake Stratton Kent, who was well loved and well admired in the occult world. And when I heard about, I did not know him personally, but I read some of his works, and when I heard about his death, I was really, I was really struck with sadness, because I grew up in a time when occult leaders and teachers were few and far between, especially when they were good and honest. And I we came of age in that time when occultism, when I if I would bring a book on Wicca into school, I could get maybe kicked out or detention, or they'd call my parents, right? Just for a book on Wicca. Nowadays, that's almost unheard of outside of hyper religious,
Schools.
mainstream Christian communities,
Yeah.
etc. But all of the writers, I remember, Scott Cunningham, to all of them. At one point when they were revered thinkers, they were philosophers, and now it's like the 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 softness and the kindness that everyone had for each other back then, I think, is gone a little bit. And when we lose people like Jake Stratton Ken, I remember, someone that was good to other folks. He had his own style, but you think we need more of the goodness. We need more of the good teachers and people that are honest and humble. So thinking about him and in this conversation, it's I guess it's something that as seekers ourselves on this path, we have to be mindful to never lose ourselves, to,
Right.
to never think that we're more than what we are so that we can still stay the servants for the servants, as it were.
Agreed. And that's
Yeah.
that thing that goes for all paths, man. Don't be bigger than your
Yeah.
britches, so
That's it.
I encourage, listeners to really learn and think about the occult traditions and practices and understand what goes on behind the scenes, and how it's practiced, because it is a path. It's a way of living. It's not just
Yeah.
something you put on and, hey, I'm a magician now.
Well,
I think
yeah.
today it's you have too many of these, fake Instagram pages with people just stealing information and passing it off as theirs, with when it comes to ritual, when it comes to actual practice. And what really called me to you, Bobby, was I was going through your page and I'm like, wow, this is some really cool, they're awesome illustrations, man, that you put up there of the path and the work. And I was reading what you were talking about, in the illustrations and how you were presenting them, and I'm like, wow, this is very insightful. this
Well,
this
thank you
is
for
no
that.
joke. This is serious. So I looked you up even further and I'm like, okay, this dude really follows this path and he's very serious about it. And I've never, this is all new to me. So I was really, really enticed to, I'm going to reach out to Bobby and hopefully he says, yeah. And here we
Well,
are.
yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation. Well, we've, I think the goal when it comes to this path is, um, a friend of mine, mentor of mine, said at one point, just tell them when they question your sincerity, say, well, then I guess I'm just going to have to see you at the finish line. And the finish line is when we ourselves, when our great work is done. And Jake Stratton Kent made it to the finish line. And
Mm,
that's his legacy, is that he was part of this community, this greater, broader, occult, esoteric community, now and forever. He gave his life to it. And I hope in my life that people will say at least that I dedicated my life to this path and that I had more positives than negatives, and they view me with some kindness, because I view these other thinkers in the same way. You have to have that kindness, because this path is a rough one, because you go to a mega church in Texas and there's 5,000 people that all are totally against who you are as a person and your way of living and your way of being, and you realize that there's not a lot of us in the great scheme of the world. And so every one of us is precious, and every one of us has an important part to play in this work. And I
right
hope
on.
that when people come to Ecclesia Babylon, even if they don't stay, I hope that it encourages them to continue their work one way or another. You know.
That's very noble. Now, this brings us to the end of the episode. Bobby, where can people find you and your work?
Okay, well, I'm on Instagram, Pineapple Abbey 156. You can find us at www.ecclesiababylon.com. Also on Instagram, just look up Ecclesia Babylon Canada or Ecclesia Babylon OSN, and you'll be able to find our other Instagram pages. So that's how you can get us, and then you can contact us through the website, or you can just send me a DM directly and say hi, and I answer all my messages, so I'll write back.
Right on. Thank you very much, Bobby.
Well, thank you.
That brings us to the end of this episode. I want to thank Bobby for this discussion on the call to Babylon. It was very insightful, and I got more information out of it, which is what we were hoping for. I hope this episode was also beneficial to you. As always, thanks for listening to Keepers of the Word with Mike. If you enjoyed the show, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel. Remember to tick the bell for notifications, and be sure to come back for more topics and guests. Until then, I'm Mike, and don't forget to always keep your word.